Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and a very warm welcome to the ITF Summit 2022. I'm Melinda Crane, and it is a great pleasure to accompany you once again as moderator of this opening plenary. And when I say pleasure, I truly mean it. What a joy that we can meet again in person. What a wonderful, full room of real people. So great to have you with us. The overarching theme of this year's summit is transport for inclusive societies. And here at the opening plenary, we want to ask how mobility drives inclusion, how it catalyzes broader societal changes that take everyone along. As transport leaders, you are very well aware that priorities like decarbonization and new technologies are dramatically transforming the way that we move both people and goods. The central question facing your sector, the transport sector, and this forum is how we can ensure, as we move to recover from the economic downturn induced by the pandemic, that we steer that transformation in a direction that promotes equitable and sustainable economic growth. And allow me just one very quick personal observation. I recently had the honor to moderate a high-level conference focusing on climate insecurity and conflict. It brought together high-level experts from all around the world. Without exception, they confirmed that the overriding priority for building the resilience that allows societies to cope with stressors of every kind, environmental, economic, health-related, is inclusion. Mobility innovations hold the potential to deliver very broad gains for both people and the planet. But those gains won't happen automatically. It will take a concerted, joined-up effort by all the stakeholders in this room, by policymakers and planners, by civil society, by industry and investors to unlock that potential. And all those stakeholder groups are indeed with us here today to participate in our discussion. We'll begin in just a moment. Just a few quick words. We do have translation available for those who would like to use it. You should have found headsets on your seats. You also see roll-ups with the channels of the different languages. Also, we'd be very, very grateful if you would put your mobile phones on mute so that we can proceed without being disturbed. And now we begin with words of welcome from our hosts. It is my great pleasure to hand over to ITF President Morocco. His Excellency Mohammed El Abdel Jalil is the Kingdom of Morocco's Minister of Transport. Please give him a very warm welcome.
Thank you so much. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, honorables participants, c'est pour moi un grand plaisir de m'adresser à vous.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great privilege to welcome you here today to the 2022 Summit of the International Transport Forum. I would like to thank the German federal government for welcoming us here so wholeheartedly. And I would also like to thank the Secretary General of the ITF, as well as everyone who made this event possible. This year, we were able to really understand the importance of inclusive societies, and that's what this summit is all about. And together, we are looking for the best solutions to implement a sustainable and inclusive growth. In this opening plenary sessions, we will be able to address the questions of an inclusive society and how transport can be a catalyst in this regard. And this will make it possible for us to tackle the challenges for an inclusive mobility and economy posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. Furthermore, we'll be able to exchange ideas about necessary policies and measures. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to mention the most pressing challenges that the transport policy sector is facing at the moment when it comes to further developing cities and rural areas. All elements of society, stakeholders in society, as well as policymakers, have to cooperate to find a holistic approach without discrimination in economic, cultural, and social activities. That is why transport systems must be redesigned and reinvented to make sure that they serve cultural, economical, and ecological inclusion. We have to reduce social disparities to make sure that we have an inclusive growth and protect vulnerable groups and empower them to really contribute to further development of these regions. We've focused on disparities, on poverty of the most vulnerable groups. And this is a call to policymakers to really find approaches based on solidarity and to recover from the pandemic. This is a call to society, which is important for the movement of people and goods. We have to focus our deliberations on the fact that we need to push change and transition forward, and our exchange here should make a contribution to finding and defining new options for inclusive mobility. E-commerce, ladies and gentlemen, has made great progress in recent years and has also been accelerated due to the pandemic. Also because different health-related measures were stipulated through our health agencies, and we had to offer health-related services for all groups of society. However, some groups of our society were not able to access these services or didn't understand them, which is why we must now focus our efforts on making these measures accessible to everyone. Due to the accelerating e-commerce, we need to find out what we can do to tackle that and how we can make our transport system a catalyst for an inclusive society that also supports inclusive growth. This is also essential to make sure that everyone can access and exercise their rights and is not excluded. It is essential that we all cooperate and support necessary transport policy approaches. I'm convinced that the coming days and debates will make a contribution to a better understanding. Unfortunately, we cannot hear the speaker.
throne, King Mohammed VI has been committed to implement significant The land of distant sunset, a land of myriad contrasts, from sea and mountains to desert sands and green plains. The journey through the Kingdom of Morocco goes from the sea to the desert. Located at the mouth of the Mediterranean Sea, Morocco is the closest point of contact to Europe for Africa as a continent. Since his accession to the throne, King Mohammed VI has been committed to implement significant achievements in the economic, social and environmental fields, a royal vision for a prosperous, developed, resilient and inclusive Morocco. Improving transport infrastructures has always been a vital aspect of the reduction of social disparities, wealth creation and improving connections between the various regions. Today, the transport sector in Morocco represents 5% of the national GDP in 2018, employs 5% of the active population and nearly 10% of the urban active population. Morocco benefits from 3,500 kilometers of coastline, giving it a strong opportunity to make maritime transport the appropriate means of integrating the Moroccan economy into the world economy. With a port network of 43 ports, 14 are dedicated to foreign trade, with an annual capacity of 270 million tons. Tangier Med, the maritime and logistics hub and major transshipment platform for intercontinental traffic with Africa, registers nearly 40% of container traffic. And connected to more than 180 ports, Tangier Med is ranked first port in Africa and the Mediterranean, and 23rd largest port worldwide. Besides, roads and railways are always developing to offer an increasingly interconnection between ports, airports, and the various industrial and logistics areas. With an overall employment capacity of 467,000 people, the logistics sector produced an added value of 43 billion dirhams, representing share of 4.26% of GDP in 2020. The road network has also been extensively reinforced to reach 58,000 kilometers of road, 1,800 kilometers of motorways, and 1,450 kilometers of expressways. The daily traffic of the global road network is approximately 90 million vehicles per kilometer. Road transport employs around 80% of the workforce in the entire road transport sector and provides nearly 90% of the mobility of people and 75% of the flow of goods, phosphates excluded. Furthermore, a national road safety strategy has been carried out in an alignment with good practices at the international level. Its main target is to reduce the number of road deaths by 50% by 2026. The last decade has been marked by an open sky policy. Morocco's 24 airports, 18 are international, are used by a multitude of global companies transporting around 25 million passengers before the pandemic. Royal Air Maroc, which is the national airline, was ranked 4th best airline in the MENA region and 2nd best airline in Africa. Today, the Kingdom of Morocco has the 2nd largest operating railway network in Africa. In November 2018, Morocco became the first African country to operate the high-speed train, Al Burak. The total network is made up of more than 2,109 kilometers of railways, including about 200 kilometers of high-speed line, to transport annually 38 million passengers and 25 million tons of freight. In this same and social economic dynamics, and to strengthen the territorial connectivity, several projects were implemented to increase and develop the rail network, such as the railway stations, which gave a new look to the urban areas of the cities. Aware of the challenges of climate change, Morocco strives to implement a new national program for Sustainable Mobility 2030. This new program will be achieved in 3 steps: the identification of the national mobility challenges, the development of the National Mobility Program 2030, and the implementation of this program. More than 20 years of determined transformation, with top-class transport and logistics infrastructure, and an expanding contribution to regional growth and political stability. Morocco is an economic hub between Africa and the world. Morocco, the world's gateway to Africa.
Excellency Minister Abdeljalil, many thanks for that wonderful video and also for your patience with our sound issues, and I hope that they will not recur. Let us now move on to the country that for 14 years now has hosted the ITF summits and provided all the services that make this forum run so seamlessly, mostly. In fact, in all those years, I believe we have never before had a sound problem. It is a great pleasure to introduce Germany's Federal Minister for Digital and Transport, Excellency Volker Wissing. Sie haben das Wort.
Herzlichen Dank, meine sehr verehrten Damen und Herren.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, President, General Secretary, ladies and gentlemen. A warm welcome to Leipzig. Welcome to the ITF Summit 2022. This conference happens in challenging times. The brutal attack disturbs our world order. It has brought unspeakable suffering over Ukraine. Towns are bombarded, hospitals are destroyed, grandmothers, grandfathers, children. He destroys families, future plans, and infrastructure. Those images, the suffering, and the brutal crimes mustn't be forgotten. What is a priority is to support the people in Ukraine and those who are fleeing Ukraine. In the next step, we have to grapple with the consequences of this war on worldwide transport. What is clear, we can only achieve that together. That's why I'm happy that so many transport ministers of ITF have followed our call of action about solidarity with Ukraine. This is very encouraging. Inclusion, this is fitting in well with this year's topic. Freedom, participation is a top priority. And the transport sector is particularly important in that, because freedom needs mobility, and true inclusion means everybody has the same chances. Everybody should have the chance to get to their place of work, to their place of training, to their school, especially in rural areas. It is up to us to create the necessary infrastructure, because only those who are mobile can be independent in their lives. Infrastructure is one thing, but mobility shouldn't be a luxury good. Low climate impact mobility is important, and it needs to be affordable. In Germany, we start a big project. We will relieve the burden from our population. There will be a very inexpensive ticket to the tune of €9, where people can use regional transport and public transport. We are planning for a simple online platform where you can book this ticket online. And this ticket has lots of advantages, which are very convincing. All passengers who use public transport benefit from that. And against the background of skyrocketing petrol prices, it encourages people to resort to public transport rather than their car. And over the next 90 days, we will gain valuable insight how we can make people enthusiastic about public transport. We don't just relieve our citizens from a burden, but we do this in a very encouraging way. And later there will be a survey of our customers. I have already heard that people are interested in our results, and I will talk about this on occasion. We have to achieve a situation where public transport is affordable, but also accessible, free of barriers, and attractive. I'm convinced of the basic tenet, inclusion thanks to innovation. Innovation in transport and the increasing use of data will help us to make all people an attractive offer, no matter where they live, how old they are, or whether they are mobility impaired. The digital transformation makes it possible to use transport in an efficient and climate-friendly way, and to dovetail that and tailor-make that for people. On-demand shuttle services, for instance, which you can order flexibly via an app, helping elderly people with less mobility. Those shuttles can be autonomous vehicles in the future. We have made a lot of progress in this field. We haven't just got an innovative industry in this respect in Germany, but we have created a legal framework which will make it possible to use autonomous cars all over Germany. This Friday, the Federal Council will vote on this law. With that, autonomous vehicles can participate in normal transport. Trying autonomous driving will enhance acceptance among people because people can see in a tangible way how it works. Autonomous shuttles, to make them inclusive, is not trivial. Car makers and service providers should include everybody. How can a blind person see whether they are getting into the right autonomous shuttle? Will people have to wait for a few suitable shuttles which are barrier-free? Are ticketing systems intuitive enough? All that will have to be considered. I'm convinced that the digital transformation and innovative transport solutions will improve people's lives. Digitization has achieved a lot during the pandemic already, but personal exchange cannot be replaced. So after 2 years of the pandemic, I'm very happy that this forum can happen in person again. It was quite a long time where this personal contact was missing. I would like to thank the ITF presidency and the ITF office for the great organization. I will make good use of visiting the exhibition. A number of bilateral talks have already happened, and that's what the ITF is for, an important think tank for mobility of tomorrow, to learn from each other, to improve our lives so that people, everybody can reach their destination safely. I thank you very much for having come to Leipzig, and I look forward to a lively exchange with you.
Herzlichen Dank, Herr Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, as the Minister just reminded us, the International Transport Forum works around the year not only to organize and convene this forum, but also to provide cutting-edge policy, research, and data as a basis for evidence-driven decision-making and policy. It also works to strengthen the ties amongst all of you, amongst policymakers, planners, industry, and other stakeholder groups, including civil society. It is a great pleasure to hand over now to the International Transport Forum Secretary General, Young-tae Kim. You have the floor.
So, Monsieur le Président, cher Ministre Abdel-Jalil, sehr geehrter Herr Bundesminister Wissing, Ministers and Excellencies, dear friends of the International Transport Forum, welcome back. Thank you for honoring us with your presence in person in Leipzig. It has been too long. Can you believe that our last in-person meeting here was 3 years ago? 3 years ago. And in the meantime, a lot of things happened. We all suffered from uncertainty and unseen complication in our lives. However, today, we are here again. I want to express my profound gratitude to the Kingdom of Morocco and to Minister Abdel-Jalil personally. This is a historic occasion, the first ever ITF summit under the presidency of an African nation. Our Moroccan friends have led the preparation of summit with enormous savoir-faire and charm. You will notice it at every turn in the next 3 days. I pay homage to Germany, the valued host country of the ITF summit since 2008. Minister Wissing, Germany's hospitality is exemplary. And the ITF community truly appreciates the Federal Republic's ongoing support. It's a great pleasure to acknowledge our summit sponsors who make so many things possible. Our regional partner, Saxony, our platinum sponsor, Capsch Trafficom, and our gold sponsor, Autocrip, silver sponsor, Waymo, mobility partner, Tier, and Nextbike. And thank you for your support. Right now, I'm standing before you with a mixture of joy and sadness. I'm overjoyed that we can finally meet again in person, but I'm also deeply saddened that we meet while a war rages less than 1,000 kilometers from Leipzig. In our member country, Ukraine, bombs destroy bridges, roads, rail lines, and ports, infrastructure created to bring people together and to enable mutually beneficial trade. This world does the opposite of what we, the transport community, are working for. ITF was created on May 18th, today. Today is the birthday of ITF. In 2006, with a focus on the role of transport as a key to economic growth and of its impact on the environmental and social dimensions of sustainability. The current situation is not going in line with the aim of creation of ITF by our founding fathers. Two defining crises of our time, COVID-19 and the war in Ukraine, are stark reminders of the worryingly deep divisions in our societies and the international community. Around the world, the social fabric has become thinner, sometimes threadbare. Fewer and fewer things seem to unite us. More and more appear to divide us. What can bring us back together? I posit that transport is one of the most powerful forces that we possess to unite and unify. Good transport, like good education, is a great creator of human opportunity. Physical mobility is often closely linked to social mobility. Just two everyday examples. A young girl, a farmer's daughter perhaps, lives a 2-hour walk from the next school. She has a bike, but there's only one dirt track, often flooded and non-cyclable. A simple road can literally pave a way to a better future, to be a teacher, a lawyer, a transport minister. Or think of a single parent with small kids. What if the jobs compatible with the family schedule are not reachable easily, reliably, affordably? Connectivity can make the difference between unemployment and having a career. Good transport systems leave no one behind. Good transport systems are not built with only healthy males aged 25 to 50. Good transport systems are built with consideration for those with different needs and with their participation. Transport is not an end in itself. It's not l'art pour l'art. It's not a Selbstzweck. But transport is like blood circulation that delivers oxygen to every part of the body. Transport serves people. It serves people to lead self-determined lives. It serves people to come together. It serves our societies to be whole. That is why we are gathering here in Leipzig under the theme Transport for Inclusive Societies, to explore what we can do and what we must do to ensure transport does its part to build fair societies that leave no one behind. Welcoming you once again in Leipzig, I very much look forward to listening to you, to learning from you, and to sharing with you over the next 3 days. Thank you very much.
Young Tae, thank you very much for those very important messages that we will take with us into our panel discussion. And that transport inclusion nexus that you talked about was cast into very sharp relief, particularly in the midst of the pandemic, when we got a very sharp reminder of the risks and challenges facing particularly vulnerable transport users. Frontline workers, the young and the elderly, low earners and the unemployed may face social and economic isolation if policymakers are unable to ensure transport options that are safe and reliable, accessible, and affordable. So how can national governments best support vulnerable transport users? What should policymakers prioritize to ensure that infrastructural development, innovation, and new technologies promote equity and inclusion? And how can all stakeholders work together to shape a truly sustainable transport system that works for all? Those are our key topics for our high-level panel, and I will now introduce its participants and ask you to please come up as I read off your names. And I begin by welcoming the United States Secretary of Transportation and former mayor of South Bend, Indiana, Pete Buttigieg. It's an honor to have you with us. Please. And I believe you are over there to the right, yeah. And it's a great pleasure to welcome the Netherlands Minister for Environment and State Secretary for Infrastructure and Water Management, Viviane Heijnen. Welcome. And I believe, yeah, exactly. Israel's Minister for Transport and Road Safety, Merav Michaeli, joins us. It's a great pleasure to have you with us. You're also chairperson of the Labour Party and a member of the Knesset, as well as a former colleague, a former TV host. Great to meet you. Thanks you so much for being with us. The president of the Fédération Internationale Automobile, FIA, is also with us. He's a Middle East rally champion and former president of the Emirates Motorsports Organization, EMSO, Mohammed bin Sulaim. Welcome. Great to have you with us. I think that you are over here next to the minister. I'm also very pleased to welcome the President and CEO of the World Travel and Tourism Council, formerly member of the Board of British Airways and Chief of Staff at the International Airlines Group, Julia Simpson. You are right there, please. And finally, we're very glad to see the Vice President for Physical Infrastructure and Digital Transformation at the Development Bank of Latin America, CAF, and former Executive Director for Brazil at the World Bank, Antonio Silveira. Great to have you with us. Please. And dear panel, just a really quick word on our format and timekeeping before we begin, because we do have a rather compact window for our discussion, and I'd like to try to get in 3 rounds of exchange amongst you. The first one to talk generally about how transport drives inclusion, then to focus on technology and infrastructure planning and different transport modes, both new and old, and close with a deeper dive on how stakeholders can and must work together to boost inclusive transport. And as I said, I'm very grateful if we can keep things concise. That means 3 minutes during our first round of exchange per answer, if you would, and then later on, let's see if we can even get it down to 2, and that way we can really cover a lot of ground. So let me ask all of you to start out by talking a little bit about your perspective on the transport inclusion nexus, and also, if you like, briefly tell us what you're doing to support vulnerable users. And Secretary, you are overseeing one of the most significant investments in transport since, if I'm not wrong, the 1950s in the US. How does inclusion figure into your plans and your goals?
Well, thank you, Dr. Crane. And first, I just want to recognize how timely and important this subject is and appreciate the decision to spotlight it. As you mentioned, equity, inclusion is a central consideration in the deployment of the $1.2 trillion infrastructure law that the President has led, about half of which will be going to transportation. And what we know is that transportation can either connect or it can divide. It can either empower or it can isolate. And so our focus is twofold. First of all, how do we make sure that transportation actually serves those who will benefit the most from access to these enhanced capabilities, whether it's an upgraded road and improved bridge, a new airport terminal, enhancements in our goods movement systems, or the arrival of any of the technologies from electrification to automation that are increasingly making the 2020s, in my view, one of the most interesting times ever to work in the field that we work in. And then secondly, how do we actually go about deploying them? So in the first regard, it's about, first of all, looking at where we have made mistakes in the past and being honest about them. We have transit and transportation deserts, just as we have food deserts. I'll give you a bit parochially an example from the Midwest where I live. There is a neighborhood on the south side of Chicago called Roseland. For residents without a car who live there, in a mostly African-American part of town, it takes an hour through public transit, or an hour and a half, to get to their job in downtown Chicago. That's the same time that it takes to reach downtown Chicago if you do have a car, from another community, also called Roseland, in a different state 90 miles to the east. And so it just helps us to see just how urgent this is. But by making sure that we are investing in those areas that were left out in the past, we can connect and create that opportunity. Secondly, the question of how we do it. When we mobilize this much capital to create new transportation infrastructure, we have the opportunity to create jobs at a scale rarely seen before. And so making sure that businesses that are owned or led by systematically excluded groups, and making sure workers who perhaps have not historically been included in construction, workers of color, working parents, women, are increasingly invited to prosper in those jobs that are created is equally important. It's about the what, and it's about the how.
Thank you very much, and we'll pick up on a couple of those themes, I hope, in our next round. Your government, Minister Heinen, has put a strong focus on sustainability, and I'd like to ask you, also as Environment Minister, how transport can help drive that and how you see the decarbonization agenda linking up with inclusion.
Well, I think it is very important to link the subject. We can make big gains for people in the Netherlands, mainly by investing in sustainable ways of transport, be it public transport, be it electric transport, but talking about inclusive transport for all, I think it's also very important to look at people that are not currently included in the good transportation systems that we do also already have into place in the Netherlands. And here we see a lot of challenges coming up. We are doing a very solid research at the moment in the Netherlands to really see how we can combat transport poverty, as we call it, because we have to make sure that everyone is included in this transition. As a government, for example, at first we provided grants for electric cars. We have a grant for electric trucks at the moment. But I always tell everyone in my department back home, what if you are a person not able to afford an electric car, even with a grant, you know? Then you don't really feel included in the whole shift that we are planning to make. So that is why, for example, we also look at ways to stimulate second-hand electric cars now. So that's already making it more accessible to a larger group. But we're also focusing on electric bikes. That is very important to increase the travel radius for a lot of people living in more rural areas, for example. And it also makes it easier to look at interconnections between other ways of transport. So if you have good public transport connected to, for example, bikes, buses, trains, and that's then more of a cycle. So we have to put it more into a general cycle. That's what we are aiming to do in the Netherlands.
Thank you very much. And Minister Michaeli, already before you took up your current post, you have had a long focus on equality issues and also on gender equality. And I'd like to know how you see transport advancing those goals.
You already started with gender and equality. So I want to thank you for this, because the main question is how do we use transportation to take people not from geographically one place to another, not even to their home or to their school or to their family, but how do we turn transport into something that enables each and everyone to get to where they want to get to in life? And that should be our guide constantly. Now, what we must see in order to include everyone in these possibilities and to make them accessible to them, we need to look through the lens of different parts of society that needs to use transport. That means looking through gender lens, the elderly lens, the disabled, whatever disabilities people have through their lens, etc., etc. In Israel now, for instance, we are doing a huge step to start closing the gaps that we have, unfortunately, towards the Arab society in Israel, and to make everything more accessible for them in transport and in infrastructure. We are working very hard to make every vehicle of transportation safe for every woman, for every girl, and actually for every boy as well. We have planned now, and we will execute very soon, a big revolution in how people pay for our public transportation, making it much more worthwhile to use public transportation with the same amount of money they used to spend on it in the past, but being able to go much further with the same amount of money and making it completely free for the elderly. So what we are demanding from our partners in the government, in the private sector, and of course in technology, is to look through these lenses constantly. Thankfully, Israel is in the forefront of technology and specifically auto tech. But what we need them to do is to use all this creativity, all these huge achievements to make sure that all of society is inclusive, is included in their achievements.
Thank you very much. And let me go now to FIA and President Mohammed bin Sulayem. And in fact, FIA is the governing body for world motorsport. Its member clubs represent over 80 million road users. So if you look at accessibility, which of course is so key to inclusion, what would you say are the main priorities?
First of all, I come from motorsport, and definitely when I took over the FIA, looking at the 244 clubs, and you have trying to make the synergy between motorsport and mobility. Our connection also with the manufacturers allows us to communicate with them for a better mobility, and also not affordable only, but we have to make it also green. And when it is, the challenges are there, one of the things that we are going to have is affordability, is connecting with the regions, making sure that the clubs are empowered also, not just the FIA. One of the things that we did is also bring in new regions. We are talking to the AAA in America. It has 57 million motorists, and we can actually benefit from them. So really, it's not just the FIA giving knowledge, but the sport that we have. It's just a high-tech sport. But if we can have the synergy between the pillars of motorsport and mobility, will be good. Another thing is we have been here in this nice place, and that was a few years ago when we had the Formula E. And a few years ago, but now we have Generation 3, which is Gen 3, in the Formula E. And that will have, it will be a zero carbon within a zero carbon championship. And by 2026, we are aiming for sustainable fuel in all of our discipline of motorsport, not just the small ones, but the pinnacle. Formula One is under pressure, and we have to make sure that we lead instead of that we are becoming reactive. So we have a lot to do, and with our communication with the manufacturers, also, I believe that we can achieve the 2026 of having all of our discipline is with sustainable fuel.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to stay with that connection, the connection between climate change, inclusion, and sustainability, and go to the World Travel and Tourism Council and Julia Simpson. Many developing countries, including those most vulnerable to climate change, depend on tourism revenues that have plummeted in the course of the pandemic. How can the travel and tourism sector contribute to a recovery that delivers truly sustainable benefits for all members also of these societies?
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you very much everybody for inviting me today. It's a great honor to be among your excellencies and such incredible, elevated guests. So the World Travel and Tourism Council, as some of you may know, we are the voice of the private sector. We're the business voice, and we have about 250 top CEOs from airports, airlines, hotels, cruise liners, also the tour operators, travel agents, etc. And it's quite unique in the fact that we do represent the whole of the sector, and it's really, really important because in that we incorporate a lot of the work that all of you do in this room. To answer your question, I was really shocked when I joined this job that travel and tourism represents 10% of global GDP. That's its contribution. And before the pandemic, it was employing more people at a faster rate than any other industry in the world. The trouble sometimes, if I may say, with governments, we tend to compartmentalize areas and don't see the power of our areas horizontally. So we lost, during the pandemic, 62 million jobs globally, and we went from a $9 trillion business down to a $4 trillion business. But exactly as you said, those are numbers, but what that meant for real people, and particularly women, and particularly poor families led by women, were people that could not feed their families, that they couldn't go to work. So for me, inclusion starts, for where I'm sitting, is ensuring that people can work and have the dignity of work. And transport, obviously, is a key factor, as you said earlier in that. So our aim now, we do some really interesting data I would be very, very happy to share with anybody in this room through Oxford Economics. They're an offspin of Oxford University. And we've just published now a forecast that over the next 10 years, we're hoping to create another 126 additional jobs in our sector. And our sector, again, will grow faster than global GDP. We expect it to grow at about 5.7% global GDP. I know we're not quite sure, but it's around about 2.7. That's what they're predicting at the moment. So again, we will be outstripping growth, and again, we will become a massive employer. The issue is, though, how do we do that sustainably? And travel and tourism is very different. I, as you said earlier, come from an aviation background. Decarbonisation in aviation is a challenge. We are very much looking to SAF, sustainable aviation fuels, but you can already see from this conversation there's going to be a competition for them. And one of the issues around SAF is going to be the scalability of producing it. So sustainable aviation fuels and sustainable fuels is going to be one of the answers. But the other is to understand the problem. So what we try to do is publish a net zero roadmap at the WTTC. Again, all of you, please look at it. And for the first time ever, we put aviation alongside hotels, alongside tour operators, alongside cruise, and we try to evaluate, and we have done. It's very, very data-driven. And I think probably the whole of the travel and tourism sector is going to represent between 7 and 8% of carbon production globally. And now we're going to be able to track it by each individual area. So I think also our motto is that when people travel, and this is looking at it from a holiday aspect, but as you know, travel is, for many, many other reasons as well. But we like the belief that our customers are telling us now they want to leave a lighter footprint, a kinder footprint. They want to leave a place behind better than when they went there. And I think that's very much our goal. So thank you.
And I want to hear a little bit more later on about some of the things you're doing to get to that goal. They're quite intriguing. But let us now go to CAF, to Antonio Silveira. And we've heard mentioned several times, both by Minister Heinen and also now by Julia Simmonds, of the need for data, the need for a good basis for evidentiary-based policymaking. And clearly that is particularly true when we're talking about inclusive planning, to really get a grasp of all of those vulnerable users who are perhaps sometimes not fully visible. So let me ask you how multilateral development banks like CAF can help to support institutional capacity and data-driven policymaking.
Thank you very much for your question, Melinda. Before going into it, let me quickly thanks in behalf of CAF ITF for this kind of invitation for such an important event. And quite quickly mention that we are a regional development bank that has member countries from Mexico through Argentina, few exceptions on Central America, but overall all the countries are members. Around annual approvals for financing up to 40 billion a year, mainly focusing on infrastructure, but increasingly taking into account some challenges on more social sectors and to boost a green development bank for the region. Going to your question, this is one of the biggest challenges in Latin America, to build up not only the databases, but open databases. There's a lot of demand for legislation in order to build access to data. There's a lot of issues on collecting data, and I should mention, we have a very innovative activities with GIZ of Germany on development of that data hub for human transportation in Latin America. Beside of that, we have a special concern on road safety, especially in urban road safety, because we do have a lot of casualties year by year. Just a number from my country, Brazil, in 2018 is the last number that I have in my head. It was like 30,000 people killed on road accidents. So we have a lot of work on capacity building for public servants, especially on municipalities, in order to change their mind on planning transportation. And this requires data, but requires a change in point of view. For example, incorporating human error on the equation. We cannot think that humans are like the theoretical economic agents that are completely rational and don't make mistakes. Mistakes is the rule, not the exception. And this innovative approach is really producing a lot of results in a lot of the cities that we're working in Latin America. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And I'm very glad you brought up the topic of safety, because I'd now like to take a deeper dive on various aspects of planning for inclusion and also new technologies, as well as a couple of old ones, and come indeed to the nexus between safety and inclusion. And dear Secretary, as South Bend Mayor, you made neglected urban corridors safer for pedestrians and cyclists. And you've also brought a safety focus to your work at DOT with a Safe Streets and Roads for All program that is investing in cutting-edge transportation technologies, but with this aim of improving safety. So can you tell us a little bit about how you see the role of new technologies and what planners need to do differently?
Thank you. And we just had a very productive roundtable as well on this issue, which is extremely urgent, I think, in the realm of transportation. And it's a good one to discuss in the context of the question of inclusion and the equitable development of transportation. In our country, not only are we seeing disturbing trends toward increased road deaths, but we're seeing disturbing patterns within them, which is that Americans who are low income, who are living in rural areas or tribal areas, Americans of color, are all more likely to lose their lives in traffic crashes. And so there is an imperative to make sure that we use every tool that we have, including technology, to make sure that we're mitigating this. Technology, of course, has cut both ways. The arrival of the smartphone is probably one of the reasons why, after decades of progress against substance-impaired driving, we saw the rise of distracted driving. And this is something we need to continue to consider as cars increasingly become technology on wheels. They can include technological features that make the car safer, not just for those in them, but for those around them, like automatic emergency braking. But this needs to be developed in a way that recognizes that design matters. And in the short to medium term, as we're going through some of these technological transitions, it will be very important for policymakers and companies to be very explicit about the difference between technologies that assist drivers and technologies that replace drivers. And again, if we get this right, we will see the benefits in very inclusive terms as well. We are deploying just this week another $1 billion in grants to communities through the Safe Streets for All program that you mentioned. And we're doing that knowing that many of the best ideas will come at the local level. And they will often require rethinking even the purpose of a road. So we are still the heirs to a 50s, 60s, 70s mentality in which the only function of a road is to blast vehicle traffic through whatever area it's going through as quickly as possible. When in fact, especially if that road is going through a dense urban area, it should have a mixed function so that cars, bicyclists, pedestrians, wheelchair users, small businesses can all coexist peacefully. That's the idea of complete streets, which I think will be one of the design principles that will be brought to bear by a lot of the communities we're supporting through this program.
Thank you very much. Complete streets is a great expression, and I'd like to take it straight over to Minister Heinen. And you, of course, Netherlands is famous for the classic technology of cycling. Several of our speakers have talked in regard to inclusion about the need not to forget older transport users. Would you say cycling, this wonderful classic in your country, is still also appropriate for an aging demographic? And again, there as well, what do transport planners need to do differently to make cycling even more attractive and get everybody possible involved?
Well, first of all, since the e-bike has been introduced, a lot of older people continue to bike. The only issue is that we have to make sure we do it in a safe way. You see that people are voluntarily wearing more helmets, for example. So these are things that can really help. When it comes to enabling everyone to make use of our very good bicycle infrastructure, it is also very important to focus also on younger children, I have to say, because it is not really the case that all children have access to bikes in the Netherlands. And that is why we also have programs that we stimulate from the national government, but it's often, these are local initiatives to make sure that every child in the Netherlands can have a bike and also knows how to ride it, because it can be quite unsafe if you don't, if it's not in your system. And if you don't get some help from your parents, for example, to teach you how to ride a bike. So we have some challenges there, but also in that respect, when it comes to young children whose parents don't have the means to afford a bicycle, for example, we have bicycle banks in the Netherlands. So you can actually go to a shop and children can choose a bike. So they can choose a pink one or a blue one, and it doesn't feel like they are getting one for free. It feels like they go into a shop and, well, they can select their own bike. So I think that is very important. And what we do in the Netherlands, especially since the e-bikes are coming up, maybe just also to refer to the question about making it accessible for all age groups, we invest a lot in bicycle infrastructure as well. So we have lanes that we put up just especially for fast bikes, for example. So we connect cities, and between the cities we don't put a highway for cars, but we put one for bicycles. And that really helps in making it a good alternative for a car, for example, or even other means of transportation.
And also helps to make it safer. I know as a cyclist, if I can't safely pass other bikes, it's a problem. Let me stay with safety, in fact, and come to you, Minister Michaeli, because you have safety in your title. That is not the case for all transport ministers. What does need to change to put safety at the very forefront of transport and infrastructure planning?
A lot. I think the first and foremost thing is for governments to be willing and able to calculate the alternative cost of what happens when you don't think through the needs of safety. Unfortunately, we are still not there. That is true, by the way, not only for transport, it's true for health, it's true for welfare, it's true for education, it's true for a lot of things through which our current economic thinking thinks through what we do and not through the cost of what we don't do. So this is sort of a binary change that we need to put in our system. And personally, I believe that the most important thing is to invest in the driver. First and foremost, the professional drivers, the bus drivers, because, we count so much on them to be able to widen our public transportation, which, by the way, of course, the more we have people using public transportation and mass transportation, we have less participants on the road and more safety. And we trust them to take us safely. And they are the ones who are, I think, the most hours on the road, having such huge responsibility on their shoulders, and it's really crucial that we acknowledge the weight that they have and really take care of them. That goes through the way we teach them how to drive. It goes through the wages that they get so they can drive not too many hours. It goes with the respect that they get from the passengers that they take from one place to another. Another, of course, sector is those who take commerce from one place to another. Again, too often it is heavy stuff and sometimes dangerous stuff. And when they get into an accident, usually the outcome is horrific. So again, we need to give them the attention that they don't get today. And the third thing really is to take the whole method of how do you use the road. And it doesn't matter if it is as a pedestrian or as a bike rider or as a car driver or as a passenger. We need to take it into our education system from the beginning and teach our children from the top how to be a community both on the road, not only anywhere else. And this will teach us to relate to each other more kindly, so we achieve at the end of the day more safety also on our roads.
Thank you very much. Let me go over to FIA President bin Sulayem. And the COVID-19 crisis, of course, has dramatically underlined the importance of digital technologies and the use of intelligent networked technologies. And I wonder if you can just say a little bit about how FIA is contributing to accelerate uptake on smart transport solutions.
First of all, you just mentioned that there is a lot of bikes in Netherlands. And to tell you that our member, established in 1883, started with bikes. So there were bikes in 1883 and then moved. Of course, mobility is not just about cars or planes, but about all sort of mobility. I'm sure that with this technology, no one will be left behind. And rest assured that the FIA and its members are committed to mobility. And I'll give you some of the funds and help that we support our members with. I mean, we have support of the City Trips app, which is with the Royal Automobile Club of Spain, which is now has been implemented in Spain and Italy. And we have also with the TCS, which is our Swiss mobility, we are launching the FIA Drone and Vertical Mobility Academy to teach them on drone. But going back to the ANWB, the ANWB made 328 trial tests on high endurance for drones to deliver blood when it's needed to hospitals. So that is something that we are part of. It's not yet finished, but of course it is. I mean, when you say 328 tests, there is maybe more to come, but that is digital. And of course, we have also, going back to the cycling, our Slovenian club is for mobility is also taking the used and bicycles and giving it to families that cannot afford mobility. So, and making sure that they get it. And of course, now we launched just a while ago, here is the website for the disabled motoring website, which is with ITF, and that would get it is like accessibility for the disabled people to get access and navigating where to go, when to go, and if there is what services are in each country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'll go over to Julia Simpson again, and I'd like to talk also with you about what you're doing in the area of digitalization that also works to promote inclusive and sustainable tourism. And I saw one thing that I found very intriguing on your website. Perhaps you want to talk about that, but perhaps you have other measures you'd like to emphasize. But this one is working with tech partners to reduce tourism's impact on wildlife and biodiversity, which I found quite fascinating.
Thank you. Yes, and I would love to touch on that, but I just first of all wanted to mention the acceleration that we've seen in e-commerce and digital passes for moving around the world. And I think I sort of want to make a plea to all governments, really, that it was completely understandable during a pandemic that governments did everything within their power to keep their citizens safe. And some of that meant closing their borders, and it meant coming up with different, sometimes digital, sometimes paper-led systems for allowing people to move around. Now, I think it's fair to say that most people thought it was really chaotic internationally. You had, let's say, developed countries putting one country on a red list and the other one wasn't on a red list, which didn't make any, you thought, well, you're sharing the science, how can this be, what's happening here? And I do understand it's because the more scientists were learning about the virus as it was coming out. You know, and for me, I thought it was a crime against humanity when the South African government and the most wonderful women scientists there explained what Omicron was about, and once they had explained everything, everyone put them on a red list, and we weren't, and you know, and that was one of the countries that really did suffer from poverty with not being able to work with tourists. So I think it has been chaotic, although I think we have to be forgiving and understanding for why. But now it's given us a great opportunity to leapfrog the kind of technologies. In Israel, they are doing actually amazing things in this. But as we all know now, on our phones, I thought I had my phone here, it's like a fifth limb, isn't it? On our phones, I have to pretend, on our phones, you know, in London where I live, I get on the bus, I get on the tube, I travel everywhere. And eventually it will be, I know Israel is trialing that you'll just walk through an airport and you won't have to have any kind of technology evident even in your own hand. But I think it's now the opportunity to bring together the individual health data, visa requirements, any other security, natural security requirements that are required into one single document. Now, there are actually 4 main, if you like, e-passports that are happening at the moment. I can't remember them all, but there's one from ICAO, there's the one that the EU's been doing, there are 63 countries, there's a smart system that the US opens, and DIVOC, I think, is what the Indians are using. So, but basically they don't talk to each other. So what we are proposing is that governments really do use a small amount of their budget to invest in creating a government platform that recognises those 4 different systems, and they are interoperable, horrible word, but with other countries. So that wherever you are, you can travel with your document, and critically for transport, that you get pre-clearance before you start your journey, particularly if we're talking about aviation, because we've all been in the back of that queue where someone's trying to find their vaccination certificate and then get out this bit of paper, you know. But now that travel's coming back, that is not sustainable. So we really need to do that. And the reason I'm saying it is, sadly, I think there will be another pandemic. So this is about investment in the resilience for the future. And on biodiversity, absolutely. We're investing with our partners, you know, around the world, because a lot of hotels survive because people want to come and visit their beautiful biodiversity, so they have no interest whatsoever in their visitors killing it off, if you know what I mean. And so, you know, what we are using is a kind of digital memory and passporting of different biodiversity so that people can record things like coral reefs. So we're very, very hands-on in that. It is an exciting new era. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Antonio Silveira, widespread connectivity clearly is a necessary but not a sufficient condition for societal inclusion. So tell us just very briefly, if you would, what dimensions you think are absolutely crucial to keep in mind in transport planning when it comes to inclusion.
Well, just let me build up on one thing that Pete mentioned on his very first intervention, that connectivity can be very positive in terms of inclusion or not. And this is crucial to understand. And if you look at Latin America, and I would like to define Latin America with 3 words here, it's quite risky, but I can say we are very diverse in all the aspects. We are actually a melting pot. We are very informal. what is good at one side on personal relations. We are huggers, everybody knows about this, but we do have a lot of informality in the labor market, in transportation, all sectors, housing, and this is really a problem. And inequality. This is a fundamental characteristic of the region. So when we look into this issue of connectivity, and I'm talking here both about physical connectivity, let us say transportation, and physical connection, and digital, you have to plan, taking into account this reality in order to promote the reduction of inequality. Let us say it this way. Not promote equality, but reduce inequality. And this has to take into account how to tackle with this informality, especially on transportation markets and labor market. You cannot just try to apply the rule of law blindly and with the consequences that can be more inequality. You have to plan in a holistic terms in order to bring in these characteristics into transportation systems. And when you're talking about roads or about streets on the city, the idea that Pete mentioned too, the complete streets that we call calles completas in Spanish, I think maybe we're on the same fountain. We had a lot of work with NYU on the issue of development of this strategy of promoting calles completas, especially for local governments. That is, I say, a major source of our development approach in Latin America. So, message, be holistic, take into account not only the issue of transportation and connectivity, but look into informality, how to bring people in, how to promote a more equitable society.
Thank you very much. And in terms of be holistic, let me ask us in a last very brief round of answers to talk a little bit about collaboration and joined up action, because all of you have talked about different levers with which you can drive transport inclusion. And I'd like to focus just now once on looking beyond your own particular sector, silo, whatever, how you can join up with others and emphasize whatever you want. Who are your main partners? What do you see as the main groups that have to be involved? But just, if you would, a word on collaboration and a brief one at that, Secretary.
Well, in a nutshell, I guess one zone of collaboration that I think is extremely important to cultivate right now has to do with having the right voices at the table in terms of automation. Things like the increasing automation of vehicles pose enormous potential benefit for people with disabilities, the elderly, the blind, and others. Enormous risk for workers if they're not brought along in the transitions, and enormous complexity, because half, if not more, of the technology that matters in automation will not be in the vehicles alone, but in the ports, the airports, certainly woven into the roads. And so workers, industry, regulators, local communities will have to be in very close contact so that this develops in ways that are favorable, equitable, manageable, and in ways that are trusted, because the enormous safety benefits that are potentially available from automated technologies will only be accessed if people are willing to embrace them, and that only happens if they were developed on inclusive terms. And of course, there's no better place to discuss that collaboration than a forum like this that has not only all the different sectors involved, but players from every different part of the world.
Thank you. Minister Heinen?
Well, I think my neighbor here, Pete, will agree, because we are both from local politics. You need local politics, for example, because they are again in touch with the people who really need some extra attention, for example. So they can really translate to us where help can be best needed. But I think we need everyone who is involved involved in society to take their part. I had a very interesting meeting just a couple of weeks ago with some important players in the Netherlands, be it political, be it business-wise, who are really committed in helping combat transport poverty. And it is very interesting to see how they want to join forces with all other partners in the chain to combat this issue. So cooperation is absolutely key in that, and I really am very thankful for all the support that we can get.
So essentially bringing in the voices of those who perhaps have no access to transport, who are underrepresented.
Yes, that is the thing. And I think that that was also an important reason for me to enter politics, to give a voice to the people who cannot really speak up for themselves. So that makes it an extra big responsibility for politicians.
And Minister Michaeli, perhaps you can also say a word about regional collaboration, because Morocco and Israel have now established diplomatic relations, as did the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Sudan. So I wonder how you see that also in terms of transport and inclusion.
How kind of you to read my mind. I was just about to speak about the regional collaboration that we so much need. So first and foremost, of course, I subscribe completely to what my colleagues have said here. But for Israel, and especially as someone who was for many, many years not only fighting for equality, but also for peace. And in our region, peace is so desperately needed. I so strongly believe in using transport to connect between our partners and those who may not be our partners yet, but I totally see them as future partners. We used to rely in the area only on threats, joint threats, and to collaborate on how to tackle those threats. But now I think we realize more than ever that we have joint opportunities, and to take on these joint opportunities and to create more opportunities for future partners to be able to come on board. This, for me, is the most important collaboration that I'm taking on as a Minister of Transport now in Israel, and I know we have such a bright future ahead of us if only we dare to do the right things about it.
Thank you very much. FIA President bin Salem, also your take on cooperation and collaboration to drive inclusive transport. Who are the main partners? You have an enormous visibility as FIA, so perhaps you can talk about what you do in joined-up action with others.
Even in my personal level, I mean, if I didn't have the partnership and I wouldn't have reached what I reached now, you know, putting all of this together, if it is the manufacturer with the tire manufacturer, with the fuel manufacturer, and you are in the middle of it, to win, you have to have all of these aspects. One more thing, that even when I made my campaign, you're talking about the world voting for me, and then we listened. Listening is very important. We invested 2,000 hours of listening to the clubs and reaching to them, because one thing they want is to be reached. And when you talk to them, what they need is very simplicity. Not everybody wants a Formula One or mobility. They just need simple things. Once, when I was elected, the first thing I reached to is the opposition. As you said, you have to reach to them. And then we brought them back in with us in the federation, because there must be something good with them. If they went against me at one point, but it's not about me, it's about the FIA, it's about motorsport, it's about mobility, all of this together. One thing more we established only lately is the EDI, which is, of course, inclusion, diversity, also, and equality, diversity, and inclusion. And who won it actually after a lot of went through the proper process of engaging was a Ukrainian lady who is, and that position is very important, because they might be the most talented driver for us in the world. But if he doesn't have the opportunity, we won't reach to him. So that is reaching to all regions, and that's part of our federation, is diversity also and inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'll go over again to Julia Simpson, the WTTC's efforts also to work in partnership. And again, one thing that particularly intrigued me was you're working with local communities under a program called Destination Stewardship. So maybe if you'll just say a word about that.
Yes, I think if the pandemic had some upsides, and one of them was hotels became the front line between people who lots of people who didn't want to be vaccinated, and they used the trust that they had in communities and supply lines to encourage people to be vaccinated. They also turned their hotels into vaccination centres. But the interesting point of this is it meant that a lot of governments who before had maybe been a little bit distant from the private sector realised how valuable that asset was on the ground. And now, for example, in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, they've got a project looking at how to deal with crime and street crime particularly, because they've established such powerful relationships together that they've realised that you can, as you were saying, that kind of collaboration, you can, really turn things around. And also education. So, for example, in the Sandals Resort, I was speaking to the CEO the other day. He says he can have a young woman join the company who cannot read or write, but if they are willing and have the right aptitude, they can leave with an MBA. Mm-hmm. And so I think that, again, governments have realized the power of that story.
Thank you very much. And finally, Antonio Silveira, again, collaboration. Where do you see the most crucial gains from that within the work that you're doing at CAF?
Especially,
it's on.
Especially on the issue of gathering the best practices, new technologies, and bringing in to the environment that I was mentioning before. This is very challenging, and the issue that was mentioned about giving voice to all people, it's crucial not only to bringing in and informing best practices, but let us call it tropicalizing it in a way that you can use crucial ideas, crucial technologies in order to promote well-beingness of people, especially, and it's very good to do it via a South-South cooperation, that we can exchange in countries that have not exactly the same framework. Brazil is not really like Argentina, but we have a lot in common, beside the football, of course, soccer, I'm sorry. And, but when you see that you can build up not only good solutions, but partnerships with this kind of movement, it's really a great experience and a very rewarding one. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
If I may, a last word. I'm listening to everyone, and it's such a collaborative forum, and we come up with all those important things, and I hear my colleagues bringing up such hopeful things that will take us all forward. And we do have enemies that are against progress and that are against for this kind of collaboration, worldwide, regional, be it sometimes in our homes, in our countries. And I think it's so really desperately needed that we come together again and again in this forum and others, and that we stand together and insist on progress, insist on working for peace, insist on battling those who try to ruin what we are building, and making sure that we won't let them do that.
Thank you very much. Very eloquent final words for our panel there. And in those words is also, of course, a tribute to the ITF, to the government of Germany, and to all of those, including the Moroccan presidency, who make it possible to have these discussions. So with that, we will close our discussion. I think we've heard very clear messages here about the importance of making transport and mobility part of the post-pandemic recovery in a way that truly does take everyone with us and that will make our societies more inclusive and more resilient. So you've set an excellent tone for the beginning of the ITF Summit 2022, and we will be exploring further aspects of some of these topics in a number of different sessions throughout the next 2 days. I'll just mention this afternoon the Ministers' Roundtable on the future of supply chains, innovation and regulation for greener and more accessible freight transport. As we know, supply chains extremely disrupted at the moment with, of course, consequences for many vulnerable people as well. And we also have our transportation innovation talks to look forward to this afternoon. They will also be looking at bringing goods to people and also at powering inclusive innovation. So please join those, and I look forward to seeing you at other sessions as well. I'd like to thank all of our speakers, our organizers, and you, dear audience, for your attention during this opening plenary. Let's give them a warm round of applause once again. Thank you.